Good evening and hello to everyone joining us online. A warm welcome to everyone joining us for today's session hosted by the India office of the Lakshmi Mittal South Asia Institute at Harvard University, or the Mittal Institute for short. I am Angarika Datta, Communications and Outreach Manager for the India office of the Mittal Institute, and it is my pleasure to open this session, which has been convened by Dr. Nobonita Rakshit, who is the current India Fellow at the Institute. This seminar marks the near end of her journey as the fellow at the India Institute, at the India office of the Mittal Institute that began in January this year. The session is being led by her mentor, Professor Doris Sommer. Before we introduce the session and the chair, I would like to take a few minutes to introduce the Mittal Institute. The Institute works with faculty members, students, and in-region institutions and experts to advance and deepen understanding of critical issues in shaping South Asia and its global impact. In essence, the Mittal Institute connects Harvard and South Asia. Formally recognized by the Harvard University as an academic institute in 2013, the Mittal Institute serves as Harvard's premier center for regional studies, cross-disciplinary research, and innovative programming in South Asia. We have a regional office in New Delhi, India, and presence in a few other countries in the region. The Institute facilitates scholarly exchanges among Harvard faculty, students, international specialists, and visiting academics, sponsoring lectures, seminars such as these, and conferences across Harvard and South Asia with distinguished governmental and business leaders whose work contributes to a better understanding of the region's challenges. Through grants and fellowships, the Institute supports that builds intellectual bridges between Harvard and the region. It engages local institutions and scholars to share knowledge, build skills, and help shape policy. ITA is a part of the India Fellowship, one of the 6 fellowships the Institute offers. We also bring knowledge from South Asia to Harvard through fellowships based in Cambridge, Boston. For this, please look out for announcements about the Bajaj Fellowship and the Raghunathan Fellowship, one running for 1 semester and the other for 2. The Institute also offers research grants made with faculty who through their work in South Asian region, build partnerships and deepen expertise by engaging fellows, associates, and affiliates from the region. Few may already be connected with us. A little about today's session. It is scheduled for about 1 hour and 30 minutes. We will begin with an introduction by the session chair, Professor Sommer, who will set the agenda for the evening. And last but not the least from me, some housekeeping announcements. Please keep your phones on silent of the seminar. For those joining us on Zoom, please put your questions in the Q&A box. We are keeping track of your questions and comments. For the audience here, when we take the questions, please raise your hands if you have. Someone from our team will bring you a microphone so that everyone, including those on Zoom, can hear you clearly. The washrooms are just outside to the right, and you go outside and turn left. There's a water dispenser out there, so please help yourself if you need some water in the middle of this seminar. Now, I would like to invite my colleague, Shreya Majumdar, to connect with Professor Doris Sommer.
Thank you, Angarika. Good evening, everyone. I'm Shreya, the Program Manager at the Institute's India office, and it is my pleasure to introduce Professor Doris Sommer. She is the Ira and Jewell Williams Professor of Romance Languages and Literatures and of African and African American Studies at Harvard University. She's also the founder of Cultural Agents, an initiative at Harvard, and an NGO dedicated to reviving the civic mission of the humanities. Her academic and outreach work promotes development through arts and humanities worldwide, specifically through the Arts and Policies Certificate for city governments to discover participatory arts address urgent challenges, and pretext that the Institute is now a proud association. The Institute has a very proud association. Train the Trainers program to support democracy through literacy, critical thinking, and creativity. Professor Sommer has long been dedicated to promoting high-quality public education. We are extremely fortunate to have her also as the Institute's steering committee member. She has graciously mentored Nobonita during her year-long work as part of the India Fellowship. With great pleasure, I invite Professor Sommer to open the seminar. Professor Sommer, over to you.
Thank you so much. I'm Happy and honored to be with you. It's been a great pleasure to work with Nobonita this year. I've learned much from her, and we've had, I think, interesting interchanges between what literature does, what it can do, how it fits in our projects of human development. So thank you, Nobonita, for including me in your life and for enriching it. I'm also very humbled and happy to introduce our panelists. You already have a sense of Nobonita's trajectory and her talents, but we will hear three distinguished panelists as you see them, and I'll just give a short profile of each panelist, and then I will turn it over to them. We'll start with Professor Ashok Kumar from the Department of Physical Planning, the School of Planning and Architecture in New Delhi. Dr. Kumar is a professor at this school since 32 years. He is trained as a human geographer and spatial planner, and Dr. Kumar believes in planning that aims at reducing spatial injustices, a task that is not well accomplished without comprehending and linking planning with broader political and economic, and I will add also, cultural processes. For Professor Kumar, collaborative planning remains at the core of planners' efforts, where plans are participatory and pragmatic. And Nobonita, just to say another word about her, her work engages with the questions of thinking and rethinking narrative strategies of transforming data of India's anthropogenic water crisis into compelling storytelling with special reference to Indian geographic novels. She received her PhD in 2024 from the Indian Institute of Technology, Roorkee, India. Her thesis attempted to explore how South Asian disasters, different in their characteristics, orientation, and outcomes on marginalized communities, compel the contemporary South Asian authors to experiment with the aesthetics of realism. And we'll end with an intervention that I'm also very much looking forward to by Associate Professor Jenya Mukherjee of the Departments of Humanities and Social Sciences in IIT Kharagpur. Dr. Jenya is a transdisciplinary researcher investigating several large-scale global partnerships on coastal and delta communities of South and Southeast Africa and Europe, Southeast Asia, Africa, and Europe. She's an associate professor at the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences at the India Institute of Technology in Kharagpur. She's also the author of Blue Infrastructures, demonstrating Kolkata's canals and wetland systems through the historical urban political ecology perspective. That interests me very much as a parallel to Peruvian history. Maybe we can develop that at some point, Jenya. And she is one of the 9 scientific coordinators of the Global Center of Spatial Methods for Urban Sustainability, TU Berlin, and the Indian representative at the 5-member advisory board of Asian Association for Environmental History. So please join me in welcoming these distinguished contributors to our knowledge and to our future. I'm delighted to anticipate their talks. Thank you. I myself will applaud.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for invitation. Before I begin, let me say a special thanks to Professor Sommer, Professor Jenya Mukherjee, and a very special thank you to Nobonita, who has invited to this event. I am facing a very different kind of audience today. generally we speak, I'm a city planner, and generally we speak within our own community of planners. But it is nice to be amongst you, because I don't know your academic backgrounds and your worldview of water and other aspects of water conservation, etc. So today's presentation is about water values, and I talk about embodied water values, meaning these make reference to individual human agents, and these water values can be experienced by us and others who have interaction with these individuals. So the title of my presentation is for water justice. Before I go to the slides, 2-3 points I want to mention. First, that according to WHO, over 1 billion people globally don't have access to reliable, safe, and clean drinking water every day. So that is one data I want you to remember. Over 500,000 annual water-related deaths globally, and 1,000 deaths per day of children under age of 5. So water is a serious challenge globally, not only for the cities of the global south, because if today cities in the global north do not experience water challenges, I'm 100% sure in the next 20 to 30 years, they are likely to face similar issues that we face today here in the cities of the global south. So my presentation is organized like this. I will say a few words on comprehending water values, list several of those embodied water values, and then focus on 4 of these: equity, efficiency, religiosity, and sustainability. Sustainability encompasses several of these values, but I will discuss these separately. And then examine empirically 2 policies and a statute, that is Delhi Jal Board Act 1998, and then few concluding remarks. And now, what is water justice? It is based on the principles of water values like fairness, equity, rights of humans and of nature, as well as democratic engagement. So we assume here that the water justice is relational, situated, and context sensitive rather than universalistic. And another definition is given by UN Water: the capacity of a population to safeguard sustainable access to adequate quantities of acceptable quality water for sustaining livelihoods, human well-being, and socio-economic development. But at the same time, also protecting against waterborne pollutions, water-related disasters, and so on. So water justice is based on several important dimensions: water education, water investigation, that is to do with research, water ethic, water advocacy, and water democracy. Some of these terms I will be explaining as I go along. And now values, human values as well as water values, I consider these as a kind of software in the human mind, the foundational belief systems that we have that steer our actions and impact our motivations. And these are not immediately visible. These are implicit. And I will argue that these should be made explicit in water utilities and the people who consume water and so on. So some of the fundamental values could be trust, solidarity, respect for others, including plants and animals, honesty, and I can go on and on. These are the fundamental human values that we experience every day. Now, coming to the embodied water values, as far as water is concerned, use or abuse of water depends on human values. And several other justices or injustices depend on the kind of water ethic that we pursue. Just one small example before I move forward. Delhi Jal Board was established in 1998. It doesn't have in the engineering cadre any woman engineer. So we can see, I'm not directly relating that men would frame policies against women, but if women were to be there, policies would be different. That much we can always assume. And water values are implicit. Sometimes the agent itself herself doesn't know and are required to be made visible. I also see embodied values in two forms. Intrinsic value, for example, nature has inherent moral worth. If that is the belief, these are intrinsic values. Instrumental values, all of us understand water should be efficiently used because it is a vehicle for human survival. So here I'm listing embodied water values and giving some examples of the same. Solidarity, including togetherness and coexistence, apart from their intrinsic value. For example, forest presents as recharge areas and help in slowing down water runoff, stormwater runoff. A respect for diversity, for examples, respecting cultures who treat water bodies and forests as sacred, but this would be rather very straightforward interpretation. In India, we do respect our rivers, but yet they remain highly polluted. So this is a complex thing. There is no direct correlation between if we think and reflect in our values the respect for nature. It doesn't really mean that those values get translated on the ground. Also, accommodation is assimilation in two ways. One is assimilation and assimilating new experiences into our worldviews, adjusting our mental structures. A second is assimilation also in the sense that nature has certain limits to assimilate wastes, and if we exceed those amounts of wastes, that wouldn't be very a positive impact on nature. So next is equity and equality. This is one of the values I will be discussing through several examples. For example, per capita water distribution in Delhi, perhaps you know, in certain areas, per capita water distribution is about 20 LPCD, that is liters per capita per day, 25. And in Lutyens, Delhi, it is over 500 liters per capita per day. In Delhi, per capita water distribution is both unequal and unfair. Example is that in certain areas of Delhi, you receive 25 liters per capita per day. And in Lutyens, Delhi, that is New Delhi, you receive over 500 liters per capita per day, which means that there are huge disparities. Overall, on average, the figure would be between 125 to 150 liters per capita per day throughout the city. And sometimes policies are also framed in such a manner that those enhance inequities and inequalities. Efficiency is one value that we need to examine. Nearly 40 to 50% non-revenue water in our cities we can experience. It is unaccounted for. No revenue comes to the water utilities. We don't know where that water is going. stolen, or it is leaked, or several other reasons. In Delhi particularly, half of the water that is supplied is non-revenue water. And now that is a large figure in the context that 90% of fresh water is procured from outside Delhi. Only 10% water is procured from within the boundaries of Delhi, which is groundwater. So most of the water is coming from outside. And if we talk about the value of efficiency, we are not really following through with it. Half of the water is lost as non-revenue water. Religiosity also, it has two faces. Religion can contribute to positively to water quality as well as quantity, but religion can also have negative implications. For example, during the festivals mentioned here, particularly Chhat Puja in Delhi, a lot of polluting materials are dumped in water during these festivities. Legalism is another idea I thought should be discussed. If you look at closely, and today we will do that, Delhi Jal Board Act 1998 makes this very, very clear that it will provide water only in planned areas, formally planned areas. And if we look at the map of Delhi, we will see only about 25% area of Delhi is planned. Only about 25%. The remaining 75% area can be divided into two parts. One is called unauthorized development, which means agriculture land is subdivided into plots, and those plots are then sold to the consumers, and with very bare minimum of infrastructure. Just road network is provided, some drainage system is provided, rest of the things will come in due course of time. That is assumed. Another part of this 75% is slums. That is a relatively smaller number. You could consider about 15 to 20% of this 75%. So even if we assume 50-25% division, still majority of the city population gets excluded from this heavy emphasis on planned development, because most of the city is developed without any planning intervention. I'm talking about Delhi, but this could be true more or less throughout India, excepting the new towns. And new towns are very few in number throughout the country. Inclusivity and empowerment. Here, the idea is that the value of inclusivity has to be empowering. And what I mean by empowerment is that the agent who is getting empowered should have the influence to make transformative foundational changes in whatever policy element is taken up for engagement. So on human rights, we started talking about human right to water and sanitation in 2010. Not all countries voted for it. A few countries did abstain. No one voted against this right, but not everyone participated in this. A small percent simply abstained from it, and one being the United States of America. So that is the situation. And here, in terms of human rights, two things need to be flagged. One, women standing in long queues to procure water from community taps or from tankers, etc. And second, when we talk about water, I also in the same breath talk about sanitation and open defecation. If I give you figures, you will be surprised. In Delhi, about 20% of the population openly defecates. 20% population implies, if I assume 20 million population today, which is a conservative estimate, it could be 25 also because I don't have 2021 census. So it would be 4 million people openly defecating. So that is a large figure. Then dignity is an important idea, and this includes issues and challenges pertaining to women. I have written gender here, but more specifically women and caste. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar's special experience in Maharashtra when he was stopped from violently stopped during the British period from taking water from a pond in a small town in Maharashtra. And only because of the caste system that we have. Then we still continue to have what is called water wives. Now men continue to, this is a tradition, men continue to marry one woman, second woman, third woman, just because water has to be fetched from long distance, and as the woman gets old, a new woman will they will marry to a new younger lady, and then she will fetch water from a distance. So this practice is still on in two states, at least I can say, Maharashtra and Rajasthan. Maharashtra I have highlighted because it is more prevalent in Maharashtra than in Rajasthan. Rights of the nature we generally don't discuss neither in academia nor in practice. But there have been few examples that I could find. Constitutions of Ecuador and Bolivia, they promote rights of nature. And recently, lying about 5 years ago, perhaps, River Ganga particularly, courts have said that they have similar rights as human beings, but then further we have not followed through on this. But this is a good idea to start with, that rivers have same rights as human beings. But this needs to be followed through and implemented earnestly. Peacefulness is another value that I think is an important part of water values, because the policies that we have, planning policies, particularly resettlement and rehabilitation policies, these require really radical changes, and water is involved in this process also. So displaceability is a term that implies uncertainty about the conditions to stay at one place. So when people are moved out, they don't have proper access to clean water. I'm told I only have 2 minutes, but I have just started. So, okay, precarity. So I will move forward. This is just putting together embodied water values at a glance and classified under the moral ethic and sustainable ethic and economic ethics. So these are some of the examples that I wanted to discuss. But now that you are saying I have only two minutes, so I will quickly move forward. Let's. I will take you to efficiency. I have discussed with you. This one slide I want to show to you. How much water do we waste due to car washing itself? This is all potable water, very expensive water that we drink. Same water is used for washing cars, and it amounts to about 2% of the total water supply in India, in Delhi. 17 mgd, and we have taken very conservative estimate per car. So even then it becomes 2% of 1200 mgd that is supplied. Um, yes, so I will move forward. Uh, every religion on earth treats water as an element. Culturally, we do respect water for its purity and sacredness. Hinduism, Christianity, Islam, in all religions, water is treated as a cleansing element. But at the same time, then this is what I was saying. If that is the case, this has to be really propagated. This idea of connection between religion and purity and water has to be propagated with the public, because most of us follow one or the other religion. So if this idea gets into the minds of people, then perhaps pollution in water could get reduced to a certain extent. Then on sustainability, we particularly in Delhi, the water supply is not sustainable. We have had agreements with Punjab, governments of Punjab, government of UP, to bring in water to Delhi. As I told, 90% of the water is procured from outside. That agreement ends this year in 2025, and we don't know what might happen after that. If government of Punjab says we don't have enough water, so Delhi wouldn't have that much water for drinking purposes. Now, this is the timeline I thought I must share with you. These are the festivities that we have. Only the important ones are listed here. Throughout the year, this happens, starting in September, and then goes on to March. These are the festivals that we celebrate, but they have also implications for water pollution. Yamuna, as you know, the stretch in Delhi is highly polluted area, but government has made efforts and started using artificial ponds, and have really saved 48,000 tons waste generated per year. This figure is 2019 figure, and this practice is on now. So 89 artificial ponds for idle immersion were used in 2019. This is the cutting from a paper. Okay, so I will just skip this. This is bringing together these four values that I wanted to discuss. Yes, so this is the point I was making. If you look at the section 9(1)(a) of Delhi Jal Board Act 1998, it says, provide water supply to any premises which have been constructed in contravention of any law. It will not provide water supply to any premises which have been constructed in contravention of any law, not only planning law, but any law, or in which adequate arrangements for internal water supply, including internal storage, as may be required by the board, does not exist. So this straight away excludes 75% of the population who lives in hutments, in resettlement areas, and so on. So this is one point I wanted to highlight, and even it contravenes Article 21 of the Indian Constitution, which talks about the right to life, and several other articles in the Constitution. Delhi Water Supply Water Policy 2016. This is the draft that was prepared by Indian National Trust for Art and Cultural Heritage, INTEC. It does highlight, the green ones are some of the values that are highlighted in the policies. My point here is, fine, these are good things that are highlighted in 2016 policy, but they don't provide any clear mechanisms or processes to implement these various proposals that they make. And this still is in draft form. It was prepared by the INTEC under AAP government. Now that government has changed. Even during their period, they didn't really approve this policy. Now further efforts will be made, perhaps by this government now. And it places heavy emphasis on commodification of water and privatization of water. And then master plan for 21 similarly highlights so many values pertaining to environmental protection, etc. But then same case here also, don't provide any mechanisms to implement these policies. For example, rejuvenation of the river Yamuna and its ecosystem. As you know, today also, we have highly polluted stretch of about 20 kilometers of river Yamuna that is within the boundaries of the city of Delhi. We are facing, let's admit it, we are facing water crisis, although we have Sustainable Development Goal 6, which gives us time up to 2030, but those targets are not met, and there is urgent need that we have to adopt different ways and means, or research in different ways, or policy making has to be little different from the way we are doing. Currently, the policies generally focus on economic values of water, that is efficiency is one, or commodification of water. These are the competition is also considered as I consider as economic value, but on other values like moral values, religious values, values pertaining to environment, these are not really discussed in, for example, the current master plan and draft master plan of Delhi. It talks about water sensitive design. First of all, design doesn't happen at a master plan level, at city level. It happens at a lower level, at a neighborhood level. Water sensitive, even if they mentioned water sensitive planning, there is no discussion whatever in 2021 plan and in 2041 plan of the city, which talks about any of these values. Efficiency, yes, but equity, religiosity, sustainability, these words are mentioned, but how to realize these values on ground, we don't find much in the master plan or even in the water policies. Similarly, National Water Policy 2012 ignores a discussion on non-economic values. With this, I will say thank you for listening. And if you have questions, we can discuss those. Sorry, I took a little bit more time.
Thank you everyone for being so patient. So there is a line that has stayed with me ever since I have interviewed one of my respondents. So she said that I chose to ignore the crisis because we were experiencing that. So, and I realized that one sentence is the story of modern India's water crisis. So we don't ignore it because we are careless or evil. We ignore it because for most of us, the taps still run. Because the crisis happened somewhere else, in another district, another slum, another caste, or with another woman's life. But what if I tell you that it's our imagination more than our infrastructure that decides how we respond to that crisis? And that the way we see the crisis may matter as much as we measure it. So let us begin with a very empirical reality that we already know. So India has 18% of the world's population and only 4% of its fresh water. And Niti Aayog warns that if this continues, then the day is not so far when we will lose nearly 6% of India's GDP. So these are the frightening numbers that we hear, but they don't make us feel thirsty. So because numbers speak the language of the policy, it's very techno-bureaucratic, but not of the embodied experience, everyday suffering. So they tell us what of the crisis and not what it feels like. So Rukmani Subramaniam, she has a book that is Whole Number Half Truths, and she said that statistics are not the neutral mirror of the society. They exclude more than they include, and it depends on what is chosen as countable. So these numbers at many times shadow how water in India flows along the lines of caste, class, and gender. So that is that in the same city, a gated colony may get water its lawns, while just a kilometer away, women are lining up for water at 4 a.m. with steel buckets. And the farther you are from the power, whether be it social, be it political, or be it economic, the farther you are from water. So for decades now, policies and reports that government publish, they have tried to bridge this gap between human populace and, and the data that they provide, the numeric, the statistics. So, but the data reports alone cannot create an episteme of care, sensitivity, or responsibility. So what to do now? Do we need to rethink how we do our environmental communication? And but that I'm not suggesting we have to discard the data. What we have to do is entangling it with other forms of knowledge, other forms of knowing. So here the stories come in. So for more than a decade, writers have translated ecological collapse into human experience. Eco-criticism, the field that I work in, has always believed that climate fiction has a positive influence on its readers. Like, it's an assumption. So it makes us more empathetic towards the affected communities. So the existing literature that is there, they have explored what are these stories that you can see some of them on the screen, and how they are told, what are their narrative strategies, and how they are interpreted by the readers. So my work goes a step forward from that position. I measure what are the consequences of those interpretations. Are there any behavioral changes? So that question led me to further explore, is there any cause-effect relationship between a text and a reader? Like, if I don't read a climate fiction, am I not climate aware? Or how could we know that what the climate fictions are saying, like the authors are intending and the readers are getting it also in the same way? So this is where empirical eco-criticism comes in. It offers an important contribution to eco-criticism and the environmental humanities because it combines the scientific and humanistic methodologies to ground, refine, and test common claims about influence and impact. So rather than exploring the authorial intention, they explore the reader's perspective. And it explores, is there really a shift from awareness as information to awareness as empathy? So they have focused on this empathetic reader, that in the moment you are reading, you are feeling yourself into someone's shoes and you can feel it. So to explore my questions that I had, I turned to empirical eco-criticism and selected an Indian graphic narrative that sits between art and aesthetics. Art and activism on water crisis. That is Sarnath Banerjee's All Quiet in Vikas Puri, that you can also see it here. So 10 years after its publication now, being published in 2015, so it remains one of the few Indian graphic novels that have directly tried to reimagine what is the ground, how the groundwater is being exploited. So it has visualizes the underbelly of Delhi. It's set in a dystopian Delhi where neighborhoods fight for bloody water wars, and its hero Girish, that you can see in the third picture, he's ready, making himself ready, and that is his machine with which he will extract the earth to get into Saraswati River as an alternate resource for the dry city that is Delhi. So it's a dystopian future that Sarnath is saying it's a dystopian future, but if we read it, we will find that it's absurd, it's funny, it's terrifying, and most significantly, it's oddly familiar. So Banerjee's feels more like you are looking into a mirror, but we are afraid to look into. So where water is manipulated by water mafias and the everyday schemes that the government are providing has been turned into business opportunities by these people who are manipulating the water. So it's a world where the poor are fenced off behind the marble walls and where water has become currency. So that has what fascinated me as a researcher to explore. Did readers actually see these as a fiction only, or is it a reflection of our own reality? So to find that out, I have interviewed 15 Indian readers of graphic novel who have read this particular work. So I had floated a Google form, and as the respondents, I asked them if they know it, they can explain me the plot in their own language. And when they responded, only out of the 31 respondents, 51 read the book. So I interviewed them over Zoom. And I asked them questions like, who reads All Quiet in Vikaspuri and novels like it? How do they come to read a book of speculative environmental fiction? And what lessons or message they take away, if any? So before now moving into my methodology, I want to just draw your attention to why a graphic novel, why comics, why not poetry, film, prose. So it's not only because it's a juxtaposition of word and images, it's because it is something unique to the structure of comics. That's the gutter. So what's the gutter? So it's a small white space that you can see between the two panels. The pause where nothing is drawn, and yet everything happens between this space. So if you see these two pages, they are full of panels, both with text and without text. So you cannot find any image of the source from where the water is coming or the architecture of the pipe, but we still know the source. But if you don't read it, how do you make the meaning? How do you connect those images with one another? So that space is where the reader's imagination lives. Therefore, the gutter is not the empty space, it's a bridge. It asks for a cerebral participation. You are asking the author is asking the reader to fill in the silence through their own experience, to imagine movement, continuity, pause, and consequences. So this is what I call participatory Jusso. So the quiet joy of co-creating the meaning. So if you see the first page and the last three panels, and we are seeing that the switch is being on, the pipe is on, and the water is flowing. So we fill those gaps with our own imagination. The author is asking us not to, like, we can think, like various readers can think it in various ways. So how we are how we're different, connecting the panels depend on our own experience. So so it's not in so readers interpret the blank space not simply through fantasy, right, through their own lived experience. So when a reader sees a dry riverbed in Banerjee's comics, they may remember a cracked earth of their hometown or the newspaper photo of a woman balancing pots on her head. So this is where comics is not a light read. They are literary interventions, machines of imagination that turn observation into participation. So they make the readers not just witness the crisis that I'm painting, I'm drawing, and you look it in through how I am asking you to. It's you co-author the meaning. So it's one of the most important form or most crucial literary, one of the most crucial literary forms that engage readers not as an objective interpreter. Like you read a novel, you read a book, you read a poem, or you listen to a song, you interpret it and you become an objective interpreter. But the moment you are dealing with comics, you are becoming an active participant. Right, so that's why I have taken a comics. So now moving on to the research findings. So the first one was, who reads All Quiet in Vikaspuri and why? So information, why I ask this question is, information about readership is important or critical when it comes to evaluating literature's actual impact in the world. So this in-depth interview suggests that All Quiet in Vikaspuri succeeds to reaching to Indians, yes, but only to those who are engaged with higher education. Like most of them are like, the 60% of them are in PhD and 26.7 are in postgraduates. So the book's primary circulation is limited within the academic or the specialist circle rather than the mass readership. So the demand for, but if we look into this graph, we will see a very contrasting idea that I'm saying it has not reached to a the mass readership, and the comic book market is it's growing in leaps and bounds. So the demand, and it has been said by one of the bookseller that it has gone up by 50% over the pandemic. So it is worth asking how Indians come to read All Quiet in Vikaspuri in particular. So here lies the twist. I asked them why they read it. The genre itself was the strongest pull. About 33% said that they are drawn to comic narratives and not to climate fiction. 26% read it for research on graphic medium, and only 13.3% came through reviews of recommendations. So this tells us something very vital, that environmental narratives in India often speak to the already aware. So they circulate within circles that already agree with what, that the awareness is already there, and not among those who most require it. So then I asked them what emotions those readers who had read it, what emotions did they feel while reading it? And the answer was overwhelming. There was worry, sadness, anger, guilt, and hope. The moment guilt came, so then we came into the understanding the readers do not have first-hand experience of it. My readers are privileged readers. So if you go through the snippets of these conversations, you can observe that yes, the book evoked powerful imagination. Like if you read the second one, it's the researcher who is telling that when she read the book, she was a reader. But now she became a mother, and this is a mother reading about a crisis in a world where there is also her son. So now that concerned awareness has turned into a sense of worry. So when asked if did reading All Quiet in Vikaspuri cause you to be more or less interested to engage with other works that are exploring this kind of crisis, so 60% of them reported, yeah, they have read about it and they explored further, and only 6% said that they are less inclined. So this we can see that how this academic engagement led to an emotion. Now, I'm not saying it's empathy or sympathy. It's emotion led to a curiosity, and that curiosity led to a continued engagement. So when I asked, as they have read it, can they say me how they look like to them? So to all, and I asked this to all of the 31 participants, and there was a sharp changes between how those who read the novel and those who had not read their imaginaries are very different. So the non-readers gave very abstract images, like people with dry lips, rural villagers, humans, but the readers who read it, they spoke with very precision. So, in other words, readers of the graphic novel had begun to perceive the hydro-injustice distinctions, how caste, class, like the last one, if you can see, caste, class, gender, geography, how that determine thirst fast. So they could articulate inequality rather than only the scarcity. So this shift from the abstraction to rational understanding This is the epistemic change literature can spark, the stories can spark. So this brings me to ask them, what message did you take away from the book? And as you can see, the strongest pull was for the pedagogical. So that comics like these should enter the classroom, sparking dialogues and collective learning. So, but it awareness didn't always become action. But there was another side. When I asked one of them, one among the 15, I am saying. So she said that she launched a Save the Water campaign for her fifth graders, and 2 months later, she finds that there is a behavioral change. So one small act, but a real one. That story gave me hope, but also a warning. Because if only 1 out of 15 readers acted, then even the most powerful story or even the statistics risk being just a momentary spark, a momentary sympathy. So why do these momentary sympathy fade so quickly? Because awareness is comfortable, action is not. We often stop at feeling bad because we mistake our emotion as transformation. But feeling guilty about privilege is not the same as redistributing it. So this study came up with this some takeouts, that whether you are a policymaker, an artist, a teacher, your challenge is not just to inform to the people about climate change, but move them to care long enough to act. So these visual narratives, any comics, films, art can do something statistics or reports alone cannot do. That is, they make invisible injustice visible. And they turn abstract statistics into faces. But for that empathy that the existing literature has said, my contestation was that for that empathy to last, we must design stories that invite participation and not only pity. So what do we go from here? So India doesn't need only narratives about water. It needs narrative that change the way we think about water as something more than a resource, as something that connects us. So the next time you open a tap, I'll just conclude it. You open a tap, remember there is a story behind it, and it may begin in a slum, a desert, a dry riverbed, but it ends with us. So the crisis will not end until we find more water, but when we stop choosing to ignore the people who live without it. Thank you.
Much. Thank you, Professor Kumar sir, and thank you, Nobonita, for your wonderful presentation. And I could really understand the methodology now in a much better way. We had a discussion like few minutes back, and I think this is very, very significant. And maybe we can craft a conversation after like an empirical case study, which is also part of a project, and like where you end. I think I start from there, that it is not only awareness, but it is also larger and deeper engagement and actions. Because when we were doing our PhD, for example, when I was doing my PhD long back between roughly 2007 and 10 in Jadavpur, and my specialization was environmental history, and I was working on the canals and wetlands of Kolkata. And so then there was a warning from our mentors, from our teachers, and they said that don't be an activist, don't try to enact. So it was just the antithetical message. What you are saying now in 2025, and I'm talking like 20 years back. So that time there was a caution that, academicians at best can come up with perspective for actions, but not actions. But I think like 20 years and we are in the Anthropocene, and, we can see what is happening, and already 6 out of the 9 planetary boundaries, they are gone, that we have already, kind of transgressed those 6 boundaries. And I think now this transdisciplinarity or transdisciplinary actions, where, who will do what is not important anymore. It is the collective agenda, and how, that can continue, I think, is a bigger question. So this is how. So I'm sorry for the title, because several concepts that are there, I'm still working on that. And I'll try to, kind of shed some light, but they are still working concepts which really need to be fleshed out further. So all these different kinds of conceptual, conceptual tractions, conceptual theoretical tractions that you see here, like transform agency or epistemic engagement and those kind of things. But more grounded and more anchored, things are Pachali and Palagan, and I'll come to them. And also, this particular island, this particular island village about which I would be, kind of focusing on. So you see, this is Sundarbans. And all quite in Vikaspuri is Delhi, and it's an urban context. And now I take you to Eastern India, and this is a rural context, and all of us know this is Sundarbans. And I'm showing a map which is like just the Indian part of the Sundarbans, but Sundarbans is transboundary, because this is the largest mangrove delta in the world, which span across both these countries, India and Bangladesh, of course, an outcome of partition as our history. So here you see that this particular village that I'm talking about, it is in the southeastern part of Sundarbans. So southwest and southeast Sundarbans, they are distinctly very, very different because of their different geomorphology, and this different geography and geomorphology also shape livelihood patterns, and the different kinds of activities in which the communities remain engaged. So this is southeastern Sundarbans, and this particular block called the Gosaba block, it's a very remote, one of the most climate vulnerable blocks in the Indian Sundarbans, with several island villages. And this particular, this particular village that you see here, up northern side, and this is like north and east, Humirmari. So Humirmari is an island village here, and and you see photographs from there. This is one of the canals from that particular village, and this is the work that I would be now focusing on. Now, I think this title of today's seminar provoked me a lot, and I kept thinking about how can we rethink water crisis, and what does Nobonita exactly mean when she's talking about narrative designs and strategies of resilience? Because also coming from different disciplinary backgrounds, each of us, if you just ask us to kind of define resilience or narrative designs for that matter, or water crisis, I think all of us, there will be some similarities, but we will also try to, kind of ontologize things and concepts coming from our own disciplinary backgrounds, our own experiences, the encounters that we make, and all those kind of things. So I think to me, Sundarbans, for example, so we just wrote a paper which came out this year in the Journal of Political Ecology, where we applied this particular concept of riskscape on the Sundarbans, and Sundarbans is a classic and exemplary example of riskscape. So what is riskscape? Riskscape is not risks. Because when, in the political ecology literature, I think scholars, they warn us, they say that when we are using risks, we are actually reducing all the different kind of coupled vulnerabilities that community face, because there are multiple disruptive risks that shape and reshape each other across space and time, with a lot of impact, with a lot of impact on the cultural aspects of communities as well, on their emotional aspects as well. So you can see that Sundarbans, like and it is so difficult for me to explain this because if you ask me, so water crisis, like supply of potable drinking water or the intrusion of saline water and the saline water remaining in those ponds and canals for long period of time after the outbreak of cyclones, these are risks that we are already aware of. But I think the risk question, or how do I say, the risk dimension of Sundarbans is even much more grave. Why? Because Sundarbans, what is it? Is it land or is it water? So I think recent scholarship from anthropologists, from geographers, and from interdisciplinary scholars, I think they ask this question, that why and how it is important to think about beyond binaries when we are discussing water. Because like understanding water only as flowing waters, which are only contained in creeks and canals, it is a Western import. So it is part of colonial hydrology. And I think there is literature on that. Historians, they have really contributed a lot so far as this particular aspect is concerned. If you see South Asian water history, they say, like Rohan D'Souza, for example, he coined this term colonial hydrology in one of his papers in 2006, where he said that, this particular approach by the colonial capitalists to kind of demarcate between solid and liquid, and completely ignoring or kind of not recognizing the fluid entities, has been a major has been a major disastrous in so far as our history is concerned. And Sundarban again is an example of that, because it is a delta. It is part of the tropical estuarine deltaic system, and which has been embanked. So all these concrete embankments which try to kind of demarcate water from land it is still having its catastrophic implications, which are extremely visible in this particular part of Eastern India. So that is why, and that is how these multiple disruptive risks are continuously there. And it's a kind of a coupled socio-ecological risk that Sundarban encountered every day, and since time immemorial, especially with the onset of the colonial regime. So what I'm trying to say is that when we would like to rethink water crisis in the Sundarbans, I think this coupled, interconnected system, this interconnections, these intricacies need to be taken into consideration. Now, as Sundarbans it's very interesting to see the literature on Sundarbans, because there's plenty of literature on the Sundarbans. And for a long period of time, literature only, or the natural scientists, they mainly focused on the floral and faunal diversity of Sundarbans. And it is very much discussed because it is the UNESCO climate hotspot. It is the heritage site. It is the largest biodiversity reserve. It is the habitat of the Royal Bengal tigers. But in this particular narrative, or in this particular projection, people are nowhere. So, and it is only recently, I think, with the seminal publication of Anu Jalai's work, 2009-10, Forest of Tigers, for the first time, she started documenting the social life of sediments. And now what we find is very interesting is that several important organizations, international organizations, and if you see the politics of migration, these organizations are talking about, and this is not only for India, but for several other volatile ecologies, that as these places, are climate vulnerable and people are victims of climate change. So the solution lies in the fact that make them, they should relocate. They should relocate, and they should find out shelter in other places. So this is what is known as the managed retreat discourse. It is a very popular discourse which is gaining a lot of momentum in the US. In the Sundarbans also, unfortunately, there's a very strong lobby which kind of supports this managed retreat discourse, which includes, of course, World Bank, IPCC, IUCN, all their reports. They are quite, they're pushing this managed retreat kind of an argument. Now, the question that we raised, because when we started our ethnographic work, so as social scientists, still no action, but only ethnography. So when we are, doing our ethnography in the Sundarbans, and those first visits themselves were very, very eye-opening. So, and we immediately realized that, when we visited Kumir Mari, I think in 2021, it was really, really an eye-opening experience, because all these different kind of depictions about the people, it immediately turned out to be erroneous. Because the people, they not only, because the projection was like this, that people are climate victims, and always they are age dependent. But when we went there, they were just talking to us about all the different kind of situated adaptive practices that they were pursuing, in these different remote island patches, which included several kinds of agroecological practices, including fishing, including horticulture, including agriculture, and how all these different practices were very much in tune to the changing climate. So I will give very quick one example. So what happened is that the villagers, the middle-aged women, they were narrating a lot of stories, because it was not a typical FGD or something. Not a very formal kind of ethnographic design that we had. But I'm a Bengali, so those were like informal addas. So in Bengali, there's a term called adda, which means informal conversations, and Bengalis speak a lot. We can just go on and on and on. So, and you can capture a lot of things, and they will just, there will be a lot of flows. So there's a lot of spontaneity, and we could immediately understand that, they told us in the last 5-6 years. So this is what I'm talking about 2021. So they told us that last 5-6 years, what is happening is that there is a transition, there is a shift from forest fishing to inland fishing. You see water, because forest fishing also, they enter into the forest creeks, and then they catch crab and different kinds of fish, and that is exactly where there are a lot of risks from tiger attacks. But from the ethnographic account, it came out so well, but they say we are not so afraid of the tigers as we are of the forest officials. Because they manipulate all these in different how do I say, legalities, illegalities around boat licenses and so many other things. So as the risks were continuously increasing, so they changed the water equation from forest creeks to inland, those ponds. So they started pursuing inland fishing in their ponds in their own household premises. And when we went there, they told us that, see, you are IIT Kharagpur, so you have a good connection with Department of Fishery and all that. So if you really would like to be part of us and help us, then we know that we are aware that there are so many training programs that go on. So can you not bring those people and those scientists and these volunteers here? Because those training programs mainly they take place in Canning and other places which are nearer to Kolkata. So that is how we don't receive the training, and that is where we are lacking, because it is still self-sufficient, but we are not being able to produce surplus. So what we saw is that they were not really victims of climate change, but they were not passive spectators of climate change, but they were coping actors who wanted to be kind of like adaptive transformative managers with some support and push. So then we became interested in this whole thing, and with the outbreak of Yash in the middle of COVID, then these questions were really disturbing and bothering us, because after we after this ethnographic interview and this field visit, when they shared photographs from the space, and we just saw that the premise where we were sitting and talking to them, the way the place got devastated, and we could see the penury. So we thought that we thought that it's time to kind of react and act. So I think I can just continue. So, and maybe later you can, because a lot of things are also available in our project website. which is called Engage for Sundarbans. So yes, so what happened is that there's a quote here, and so what we did is that after our field visits and Yash cyclone, and then a discussion in our team or as a collective team that it's time to react and act, we thought of kind of pitting social resilience against managed retreat, because that is what we found, that was the reality from the ground. And what is social resilience? Social resilience, I think it is like, the three key pillars, one after the other. So one spins off to the next. Yes, it has come. This is known as the CAT capacity of communities. So CAT means coping, A is adaptive, and T is transformative. But I'm not going to those this literature and theoretical paradigms. But yeah, so one fundamental tenet of this social resilience is that, like, it's not migration, but it's staying as a climate adaptation practice or tactics. Now, I am not a student of literature at all, and but then when we started our work and we got motivated that we will be now working on the Sundarbans, and we were quite excited. We realized that it would be important to try to find out what literature, including vernacular, because there's a wide range of literature, from global literature written in English by very renowned, personalities or authors like Amitav Ghosh and Salman Rushdie, to the vernacular literature that we have. And also, we should not forget the primary vernacular literature which exists since the medieval times. So there is a medieval vernacular literature in the form of Palagan, in the form of Pachali, and we definitely have this tradition of worshipping Bonu Bibi, which is the Bonu Bibi cult in Sundarbans. So so we started exploring with all these different genres and the fiction that exists. So far as depicting these island villages are concerned. And then what happened is that we started finding a lot of similarity and resonance between the way characters had been portrayed in those fictions and the characters who exist even today. So I'm not saying that things have not changed. Things have definitely changed. But to a great extent, the ecology and the geomorphology of the space shape and determine culture of those communities. Now, again, quickly, so this is our project. I cannot go into the story that what happened, etc. But I would just tell you that this project is actually an outcome of what the communities wanted to do for them, not for us. And this was also not us, doing the project, designing components as we understand it correct. So it really, this has happened where, a kind of a bottom-up template could evolve and could be followed. So, now very, very quickly, I think I'll focus a bit on a methodology, and that also, it was an accident. It was not planned. It was it's not part of deliberate planning strategy, but something that actually happened. So this particular project that I'm talking about, Engage for Sundarbans, here we actually apply a methodology which we call A to E. So A is archival, E, the first is ethnographic, and the second is experimentation. So you see that how there is a kind of an integration between academic and action-oriented research practice. So the idea was that when we were actually trying to gather data for ethnographic surveys, so the household surveys we were kind of conducting, and 392 people. So there is a strategy which was followed to kind of gather data from 392 households from this Kumirmari village. And when we actually opened this tool before the community, you can see one of the, this picture, which shows that where I was trying to explain, the tool, because the idea was to gather reflections and perceptions, yes, and their understanding about how, they perceive disasters. Then what happened is that when the tool was placed, they were giving lot of critical insights, and those things we did not think about when we actually designed the questionnaire. So there was an understanding that these people, will do a better job if they become enumerators than us. So that is how, like this idea of inhabitant interviewers emerged. And then, like I just 1 minute. So yes, I'll try to finish in 1 minute maybe. So, so what happened is that initially the idea was that we will be collecting the data, because these days nobody collects data using, that the traditional pen and paper method. So there are good softwares and applications. So the idea was to, kind of use service ETO for convenience and all those kind of things. But now immediately when this decision was taken that these people will now, conduct or gather the data from doing the interviews, then the question was like, will they be able to use the service ETO application? So there's a lot of apprehension around that. So again, very, very quickly. So then the our key field implementing partner, who is also the leader of the team, he came up with an idea. So he called me during the midnight, and that was a eureka moment when he said that, why don't we use the Palagan, the Pachali format to make them kind of memorize the question. And we have done it. It is extremely successful for the 5 households which he chose or selected as the pilot mechanism. And this is how the so again, to cut the long story short, so Pachali method was actually used to kind of make them familiar with the nitty-gritties of the otherwise very technical tool, and this was successful, but a lot of efforts went into it. And then finally what happened is that we conducted our regional workshop last September, 2024 September. And then it came from these people that we would like to enact a Palagan performance. And through this Palagan performance, we will be narrating the story of how 7 enumerators, 4 women and 3 male members, they actually, kind of gathered the data, but the kind of difficulties that they faced, and how did they, kind of find the solutions to deal with those difficulties. So it itself becomes my argument here is that how Pachali and Palagan became formats where, initially they were used as strategies for convenience, but later they became tool communicating and conveying stories of deeper engagement. So this is a 1 minute clip from there.
যার দক্ষিণেতে সুন্দরবন নদী কোরআন খালি আর উত্তরেতে আছে
poor connection, but yeah, I will be happy to share this with you. And so here what happens is that they use this song, this performance to narrate.
দেখো নদী কুই জালি 88 ঘূর্ণিঝড়ে কত হলো ক্ষতি আইলা তো যা ক্ষতি হলো সকতি নাই গতি হোদ হোদ বুলবুল ফণি আমফানি আর যত কত এলো ঘূর্ণিঝড় নাম কবতার কত
A request to everyone to kindly pay attention. To the obscure island, we now give description. Bordered by Sundarbans and river Koral-Khali on the south, and river Punjali on the north, gaping its mouth. River Rai-Mongol overlooking Hemnagar on the east. The west has river Sharusha, by which Mulla Khali exists.
So yes, so this was just there were a lot of jumps and leaps, and I had to just rush through the whole of it. But I think the connection between me and Nobonita is that where we, I think, discuss a lot about epistemic engagement, and this is something which is very subjective, relational, affective. But I think this is the correct moment where we need to discuss this, because the translation was made by my research scholar, and we are a team. So and people have forgotten who is a research scholar, who is a supervisor, who are the project leaders, and so all together. And this, and thus the project is also Engage for Sundarbans, and Engage is also an acronym. So I would also invite kind of see the website and also be part of this larger, deeper engagement. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much to all of you. Thank you, Jenia, for exceeding your time a bit, because really the work is spectacular. And I hope that we can collect questions and comments because our time is out. I have several things that I want to ask, but I'll just mention them and then I'll have to log off. But with Professor Kumar's talk, he is engaging community advice, spatial programming. He's an expert on the uses and abuses of water. And you talked about the importance of religious perspectives, cultural perspectives. I wonder if in another version of your work, another possible collaboration in your work, this perspective on narrative and cultural practices might be just part of the articulation of your collaborations. Because when we silo natural sciences and political sciences and culture in different ways, sometimes we miss the connections. And Nobonita, I'm so happy to see you move from a position of just assuming that these books produced a change to actually investigating. And I think that the advice that Jenny has been giving us to join communities, not just read about them, is so critical. One project that we're doing with the Mittal Institute is to promote pilgrimages of decision makers to affected areas. It's one thing for people to read statistics, even to read narratives, and another thing to walk with people, to meet peasants and fishermen and people who are inventing ways to stay on their territory, whether it's land or water. So let's think about continuing our research together on foot, meeting people. And Jenia, let me say how much I enjoyed that last video of turning research into song. Shreya introduced me as a Mittal Institute collaborator, mostly through the work we do in Pretexts. And Pretexts is a literacy program that turns challenging texts, scientific texts, narrative texts, into raw material for making local art. Yeah, so I look forward to more conversations with you and seeing how we can land together in real territories. But you see, I'm inspired by all of you and provoked to do more. And I hope that the other people online, like myself, will post questions, commentaries, offers of collaboration so that we can continue this very crucial work together. And with that, I applaud you and I excuse myself. There are meetings now. I'm on a morning schedule, but really I celebrate this very important work that you're doing and I'm grateful for it. Thank you.
Thank you so much,
And
Professor Sommer. Thank you so much,
I will
Professor
log
Sommer.
off. I will log off, but I hope you continue, and then I'll see the recording. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Sommer, for your time.
Thank you so much, Doris.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'll continue for another 10 minutes. We've exceeded our time by quite a bit. So we'll take questions from the audience in here. We'll take some questions that we've got online. Yeah, so let's begin.
Jenia, thanks for a really nice presentation. And I think the part that really stood out was to get that community itself to engage and get the data out for you. I haven't heard of research being done like this. And the fact that they used an oral tradition and they were the ones who were engaging and getting the data. If you could just compare, because this is a complete fillip to the way things are done, some perspectives or insights that you got, which were very, very startling or obvious because the community was sharing the data. If you could share that with us.
The challenge is that I really have to be very, very quick. So, and the thing is that, from day one, I think when we went there in Comemar, because we're hopping one island from other in this particular part, southwestern part. And then the first time we reached here, because we had some time to talk to them, the way they started introducing themselves and the area, the landscape. And, we were also, in technical terms, this is like transit walks. So the way we were walking together. So I was really, all of us, I think, were very much positively surprised with the confidence and with the anchorage that they had. And there was no doubt, no apprehension, no confusion for us at all to really understand that, unfortunately, managed retreat or these kind of discourses are extremely top down, and which really does not accommodate social or community aspirations. And then, all the different empirical evidences or all the different specifics, that they told us, that what they do, how they deal with disasters, all the small points and nitty-gritties and those nuances. So we were extremely, carried away with that. And we had a different picture about, social communities in Sundarbans after we came back, not from our field work, but from our field exposure trip. And that surprise, I think it continues till date. Every time I visit there, and every month I visit there at least once. So all of us visit there a number of times, but then I visit once at least. So the last visit in October, there were also elements of a lot of surprises. So a lot of how do I say, lot of learnings, through these exchanges. I think it's a mutual exchange. So academia and community and sea-free people, Central Inland Fisheries Research Institute, and the others, state government, groups, bureaucratic circles, who are also now part of this project. The project is actually increasing its ambit slowly, layer by layer. So I think now, it's what we really love is the knowledge that each of us gain from each other through this transdisciplinary engagement. So I'll be very happy to share more and more and more about this initiative, and where everyone is a designer. So thank you very much for asking that question.
So first of all, nice presentation by both of you, ma'am. Sorry I missed yours because I was just rushing. I'll just take your line that awareness is comfortable, but action is not. So the water crisis, what does actually mean? So I'm just reading some research paper. So 2.2 billion people all across the world are drinking water which is contaminated by fecal. And every year 1.5 lakh kids are dying just because of the contaminated water. So there is no scarcity of water, there is a scarcity of clean drinking water. So the question is that, from your words, again the awareness is comfortable, action is not. What is stopping us to take actions? This is not question to all. This is question for all of us. Which is the main thing that is stopping us? Because we know we are all aware, but why are we not taking actions? This is a question for everyone. Yeah. Thank you.
So thank you for the question. I think what is stopping us is because we don't have the narratives that can constructive channelizing of the sympathy or the awareness that we have. That is not there. So if you can just go back and see tomorrow's opinion in Hindu, so they have an opinion piece that 3 out of 4 Indians are feeling and are agreeing that they are feeling climate change, but they don't know what to do. They are ready to change their behavior, lifestyle. They are ready to do, but they don't know what to do. Why is it not there? Because that was that the mobilization is not there. So we are stopping after we closing that book. So that if we have more narratives that can tell us how to channelize our sympathy or the momentary spark that we are having, I think that can, it's I cannot say that if you just make an individual choice, and because climate change cannot be changed by an individual's choice. So it's a collective responsibility that is not there. I don't want to take responsibility, and my tap is running still. So that is the lacking, what I think.
May I just add?
Yes.
Yes. So thank you for asking this provocative question. And there is no clear-cut answer to that. But I think that this is also not true that there are no actions. Because if you just see this domain called environmental humanities, you see that because I remember when again I was doing my PhD, then of course my teachers were not happy with me, because the question was like, she is from the Department of History, and what does she do on the bank of the canals? She should be spending hours and hours in the archives. But now nobody asks these kind of questions, because I think all of us can use whatever methods we just want to use, because the research questions are much more important than we are coming from, whether sociology or anthropology or anything else. And the way the artists, the more than academic people, they are coming into the picture, they're taking actions, they're mobilizing different groups of people. See so many examples, good examples, even the kids, the young people, so many names are there, who are mobilizing, climate actions all over the world. So, but it takes time, because the answer is the corporate lobby. Because one particular line from John Bellamy Foster's book, Ecology Against Capitalism, is, I think, it explains in a better way beyond all the different, big fat books that you have on climate change and emission. Because it is the emission that we're not being able to control. Now, who are the we? It is the automobile market, and it is the corporate mafia. It is the all these powerful people, and we know that how. So the political economy behind climate change. So that is where it's very difficult to mobilize and organize and keep fighting with limited funds, limited many other things. But that does not mean that actions are not taking place. So I think it is more important. So I would just finish by using this quote from Anna Singh, who says it is very important for all of us now at this moment to actually acknowledge the catastrophe, the climate catastrophe, but yet imagine possibilities.
So, see, from historical perspective, why action is not being taken? Several reasons. One reason is that we have a colonial legacy, and same kind of organizations which are largely non-participatory. For example, Delhi Jal Board and similar kind of organizations in other states. They are not accountable to public directly. Civil servants run these organizations. Politicians, which we elect, have some influence over. So the nature of these organizations is such that officers in these organizations really don't feel enough pressure to act on the demands of 75% population that I mentioned. They do respond to a middle class that is about 25-30% in the city. They do respond to their demands. But for majority of the citizens in any city in India, these organizations don't respond. So some action needs to be taken to democratize these organizations. I'm talking about water utilities. Water utilities are not given to municipalities, for example, which we can elect and re-elect. So these are all quasi administrative organizations. They don't really respond on a day-to-day basis to public. Second, as I mentioned, the kind of acts that we enact. Delhi Jal Board Act 1998 is one example. This idea of urban, you see, with E, that people are going to formal jobs, they have a briefcase, going in the morning to office and coming in the evening. That is entire falsehood. Most of us don't do these formal jobs. 90% of us don't do these formal jobs. So this idea that if you are not urbane enough, planned enough, then we will not be providing to you. That idea has to go away. And two excellent presentations made by both of you, I must say, pave the way towards that direction. I think this participatory, we keep on talking in planning also, we keep on talking about participation, but you have provided some concrete pathways to how to do it. So this is a start, but this is, as Nobonita also said, this is a collective responsibility. All of us have to make an effort. Like I mentioned, how to change this policy? Only one woman engineer in Delhi Jal Board. There are hundreds of engineers. How to change this? Someone will have to start somewhere and bring about that change. And why Delhi Jal Board is saying that if the area is not planned, adequate services are not provided, we will not provide water. The only way, partly they are doing this job under political pressure, or courts are saying that. Changes are possible, but historically we have to really change these organizations, which we see. The British, when they went away, before that we had improvement trusts, and improvement trusts were nothing but the organizations which the British led, because all development work they never trusted us. So all the civil works that was to be done was done by the improvement trusts. This was done only when Indians started getting elected to municipalities. As soon as we got independence, we created development authorities. And these tasks were not given to elected bodies, which are municipalities. Things are changing after 92, 73rd, Fourth Amendment particularly to do with the cities. Things are changing, but it will take a little more time and certainly there is kind of discussions happening here on less on the economics of water and more on other aspects, non-economic aspects. These have never been part of the discourse on water and sanitation. So this is a good change that is taking place, and I am being part of these excellent presentation both of you have made. I have learned quite a bit, and there is a hope, I think, with your methodologies that you are proposing, that we can move forward in a positive direction.
Hi, Dr. Mukherjee. Thank you for your presentation. I'm a PhD researcher at JNU, and my research focuses very similar to yours, but in a different ecological setting in the Vembanad wetland ecosystem in Kerala. So you talked about saltwater intrusion and your ethnographic research there, and you also talked about staying as an adaptation strategy. My question is, during your ethnographic interviews, were you able to identify anything at all related to whether the staying is voluntary or involuntary, especially in the context that now we have a lot of conversations happening about climate immobility? And my second question is, you talked about saltwater intrusion. Were you able to identify, if at all, any health implications to people staying in that waterlogged regions because of saltwater intrusion?
Yes, thank you very much.
Sorry to interrupt you, Professor Mukherjee. We will just take another 2 minutes. We'll have to close very quickly. I'm sorry.
Or otherwise, we'll just go out and talk. So I think thank you very much, because I remember David Moss, focusing on Vedant and because a historian. But yes, coming to Sundarbans, I think staying as an adaptation strategy just recently, last visit only. So we were doing a focus group discussion with male and female members, because we are actually curating an exhibition on flood memories of people from some island villages of the Sundarbans next month. So so I'd love to talk about the exhibition, outside. But I think like one of the sections is like augmented artifacts. So where we collect, not we, like, the artists and the social scientists, the ethnographers, they collected some materials, and all these different materials or artifacts, they have plenty of things like checkered and, how do I say, like layered narratives to share. So you just see a fodder vessel, but then, the text tells you that how, like there's a lot of emotional attachment and affect with that fodder vessel, and how that is very different from people who experience similar kind of, like floods or other risks in diverse geographies. So now focusing on migration, we're trying to curate 2 drawers, and every drawer has like some column. And so the question that we ask is, what do you take when you go out, and what do you bring when you come back? And you will just be so, excited to know the stories and those narratives. But migration is a reality in Sundarbans. It is seasonal migration, as you rightly mentioned. So they go out and they come back. And lot of changes are also taking place so far as these seasonal migrations are also concerned, because, COVID was a slap to many of them, many of the households, where they could really understand that they need to find out alternatives and other strategies to even, kind of make this staying in their islands, like, how do I say, more productive and meaningful. Because otherwise, they saw the implications of migrating to other places and other cities, and how all these cities turned out to be extremely non-accommodative during the COVID times. But, a lot of others, I cannot explain this in few seconds, but I would love to, share everything that I know from those islands with you.
Thank you, Professor Mukherjee. Now we have just one last question from the online audience for Nobonita. Nobonita, it's a twofold question. Somebody's asked, why did you keep your sample size of only 15, which is quite small? And second, your choice of the medium of change, if they may, through the reading of graphic novels is interesting, and they were left wondering how it would create a culture of empathy when the interaction with this medium is so low. How can we create a culture of empathy of any significance through reading niche forms of literature when largely indifference rules the roost? I would request you to keep it just barely 30 seconds. Thank you.
So the sample size is 15 is because the audience is like, for the readership for this popular culture is very niche. So over trying for over 2 months, I could get only 31 responses. And this I am talking about when I have circulated the form in the groups, which are especially for the people who are dealing with comics. To come to the second question, why how reading can create empathy? No, it cannot. It cannot, because it cannot. Even if you even if I'm doing research, even still I cannot feel how a person is feeling standing in the queue from the morning to night. I cannot feel that pain or the suffering or the embodied experience. That is because it's not empathy. It's epistemology of sensitivity. That's it. So I'll just sincerely thank my mentor for her constant guidance and support throughout this work, and my heartfelt gratitude to my panelists, and who have their coming here out of their valuable time and in sharing with us the insightful comments. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, sir. I also want to thank Shreya, Angarika, Shushma ma'am, Amit, Arun and Mukesh Bhai, my people at the Mittal Institute who stood behind this seminar. And I special thanks to our executive director, Hitesh, who could not join us today due to his official commitments. And finally, thank you to the audience for being so patient and for your constant engagement with us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone in person here, online with us. Thank you for joining this session. Please do check out the Mittal Institute's website. We are on Instagram, we're on LinkedIn. Please do follow us. And we have more sessions coming up. We have one online session coming up on the 3rd of December. We have another seminar, Arun's, coming up on the 19th of December. Please do join us. Thank you so much. And I would request all of you, if you're not tired, just to come for a group photo at the end. Thank you.